Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Mrs. R. My name is Marian, and it's always a pleasure and privilege welcoming you to our little space where we try to handle questions and issues that hopefully make a difference and makes your journey just a little bit lighter. And of course, what will Conversations with Mrs. R be without Mrs. R? It is a pleasure to welcome, as usual, Mrs. Nkoyi Rapo. It's always wonderful talking with you, Mom.
Thank you, Miriam. You give me such inspiration.
Wow. So now, for this edition, we're going to be continuing with the last conference we had. So for everyone out there who's wondering what I'm talking about, we usually have conversations with Mrs. Ao like this on YouTube, but also we have it live here in Lagos, Nigeria. So if at any time you can be a part of it, it's always a wonderful experience. And what we discuss here is always something that comes from the discussions during the conference we have with Mrs. R. Now, Mrs. R, one of the things we talked about the last conference, our focus was establishing boundaries. And it was amazing how it was moving from mental health to physical boundaries to emotional boundaries. And there were so many questions that came on the day. Now, if you missed it, the good thing is that you can go on YouTube, just type Conversation with Mrs. R, and you can be a part of it. So even if you were not at the conference, we'll get to you. Okay, you can be a part of it via our link, Conversations with Mrs. R. So today, we had questions that we couldn't handle on that day. Because the time was limited. And so we'll be taking some of those questions to get answers and hopefully help people who were there and anyone who's watching right now and saying, I'm in this position. But a quick recap. Boundaries. Why are boundaries important?
Boundaries are important because it's all about, or majorly about, self-care. Not only self-care, but also when you set boundaries, I think you are also caring for other people. And I found out that a lot of the things that we go through, even matters that affect our mental well-being, have quite a bit to do with not setting appropriate boundaries. Boundaries in your workplace, boundaries in family relationships, boundaries even in marriage, boundaries in church. And I think some of those things were dealt with at the last conference. So boundaries are healthy. And we saw at the last conference that boundaries, the idea of boundaries is rooted in the Bible. And I gave various scriptural examples. So here we are again, boundaries.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to dive straight into the questions that we had, extra questions. So remember I said if you want to get the full gist of the conference, just go on Conversations with Mrs. R. It's posted there. Now, one of the questions that we could not handle on the day was, how do I, now we had talked a lot about boundaries in office and all that, and someone said, how do I handle indiscipline in myself? I can't even discipline myself on the boundaries I set for myself.
I see. I'm going to take an example of what I suspect could be going through the minds of people like her. Boundaries with food.
All of us that say January 1st, our diet starts.
So you've made up your mind. So I think we have to even commend people who can say, it's time to set a boundary with my eating habit, okay? So how would I start? You've established that there is a need to set a boundary. So I would say that's a plus, because there are many people who are just going to the fridge every day and don't even realize they need boundaries. So kudos to that person for even considering boundaries. So when you start from that perspective, then I think you have the inspiration to take the next step. And the next step, I would think, would be to define, okay, why is it important to do this?
Okay.
What do I benefit? And I would actually write down. That doesn't mean that everybody should write down, but I'd recommend that. What are the pros and cons? What are the disadvantages and the advantages? And put them out there. You'll find out that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So I make up my mind and say I would cross out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from my budget, from my diet. And don't think you're going to achieve it in one day.
One day. Okay.
Measure your progress. So the word there would be measurable progress.
Measurable progress.
So if I liked to eat my biscuits and I was eating 10 biscuits a day,
okay.
or 10 cookies a day, I would then say, start with, reduce it to 8. Then reduce it, do well at the stage of 8, and then move it to 5, and gradually. And when you make a mistake, just say it's a learning curve.
And start again.
And start again. So don't give up. Keep at it. And if you need to take it a step further, get a friend who's committed to the same challenge. Okay. So I'm trying to look at the very practical ways now, instead of saying, pray about it. Prayer, So prayer gives you the wisdom to articulate it, write it down, and take it in manageable bits.
Yes.
And don't feel bad when you don't succeed. Just dust yourself up and say, keep trying. And then when you've done well, celebrate and give
every
yourself,
achievement.
don't cut off completely. Have a cheat day where I'm allowed to have my cheesecake. I'm allowed to have my akara. Even though it's fried in oil. Saturday would be that day. So you look forward to giving yourself a treat that says well done.
Okay, I think I like that. I like that because I like the fact that don't overwhelm yourself.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, when we make that commitment, 10 kg in this 1 month, I cold talk, I kill myself. Then 3 days you do it, then the 4th day you eat more than in 3 days. Okay, this I can truly relate with, so I've learned something today. This one says, my issues with boundaries is from low self-esteem, always wanting to overcompensate because I want to be accepted and appreciated. What can I do differently?
Yes, that's a good one. If the lady were sitting here with us, Miriam, I'd tell her she's really fearfully and wonderfully made. But you see, that's a biblical perspective. A lot of times, people suffer from a sense of insecurity, which could be rooted even in their upbringing.
Yes.
It could be as simple as the fact that when you were in secondary school or going through adolescence, secondary school, you were plumpy, and everybody else in class was skinny. And you were made to feel that meant the other people were more beautiful than you were. And as a result, you courted their friendship. You wanted to be approved. You wanted to be recognized. You wanted to be affirmed. You wanted to be let into the playground, and have friends. So I'd be really empathizing with that person and saying, however, who you are is by divine construction. God took time to carve you out the way he's made you. And if you extend it sometimes to people who actually have handicaps and maybe a hearing or, a problem, then you have to look at it from a perspective of compassion. And I would be saying to that person, to those people, however you are and whoever you are, I want you to know that you're special to God. You're special. You're special because you carry his spirit. You're special because he loves you. You're special because if you were the only one on earth, because you have God's spirit, Jesus would still have had to come. So I'd encourage them to derive their sense of self-worth from God. And how do you further enhance this sense of self-worth? It's actually from the Bible. Because when you read the Bible, you see how God, even with our human frailties, extended such mercy. And you and I were talking about David this morning, how merciful God was to David in spite of David. So God wants us to have a sense of his affirmation that is a premise for how we see ourselves. And I'm reminded of the 12 tribes in Israel that went to spy the promised land. The 10 spies said, we were like grasshoppers in our sight, and so we were in their sight.
Exactly.
And I thought to myself, how did they know they were like
In
that
their own sight.
in the other people's camp?
Because they could only see themselves
Because
like
they
that.
could, yeah. So you were not, in the first place, you couldn't even confront the giants of the land. You were running away. So how did you comprehend that they were seeing you? So it started first with how they saw themselves. And from that perspective, they judged that other people saw them that way. So sometimes when we have a sense of insecurity, it's the enemy lying to us.
Yeah.
The other people are not, they're probably too preoccupied to notice you.
Yeah.
Gideon felt that way, and he was hiding in the cave. And the Lord said to Gideon, what are you doing here, oh you mighty man of valor?
Exactly.
So God spoke to the Gideon to the God's Gideon.
Yes, not the Gideon Gideon saw.
Not the Gideon saw, thank you. So that would be, and then that would be my advice to that person. And then how do you physically deal with that sense of insecurity? Perhaps to stay within company that enhances you, that celebrates you. Of course, you can't always
have that.
But that would also be an added advantage.
Yeah, I agree with that, because when you have to overcompensate to be accepted, then there's fundamentally something wrong. That might not be the space you need to be, because if you always have to pander to their whims and caprices for them to love you, then you are not gaining anything.
And you're probably in the wrong company.
Yes, you're in the wrong company.
Yes.
And it reminds me, when you were talking, I could remember, you know, when you're shopping online and you press on a product, there's a part that says product details, and you press on it and it brings down all the things that the product has, this, that. And I when you were talking, it reminded me that when you're not sure of yourself, the Bible is your press on your product details.
Good
and
one.
You can press on it and it can tell you, drop down all the things. The picture usually doesn't tell you everything that product can do. But when you press on product details, there's a drop down that now tells you in detail what that product is capable of. And so if we see ourselves as that product, and we now have to, the product details is our Bible that tells us, you are this, you're wonderfully and fearfully made, you know, in the year of famine, you will still reap, you know, those scriptures, I think would, I do something, I paste them on places in my house, on my mirror, you know, places I know I always look at, I paste it there. Those on my table in the office, I have pasted there, just so that the days you're feeling down or less than yourself, you look up and it just gives you some kind of encouragement. And I think that's what she and so many of us, and then there are days you're feeling good, but there's always that one day that's...
Everybody has that one day,
that you're just not sure.
Yes. I just thought of something to add. I think it's also good, every one of us has good traits. You have something to give the world. So you can sit down and write to yourself, I can speak well, I can dance well. Write down the attributes you have.
I can cook well.
I can cook well.
I'm a good cleaner.
Yes. And then you'll find out that it's not bad.
It's not bad.
No.
Yeah, I do agree. Okay, I'm loving this. This one says, how do I mind my boundaries with disrespectful colleagues? I'm sure a lot of people say yes. How do I mind my boundaries with disrespectful colleagues?
Okay, let's try and look at it without going to the Bible first. So I would think to have a conversation.
Okay.
I found out something. When you see a lady, no matter how fierce, or even a gentleman, if you say something like, oh, Miriam, I like your wig, it's quite nice. All of a sudden, their guards...
They have a smile.
They have a smile and they drop their guard. So it's like people, sometimes even in our environment, are braced up for a fight. So when you say a kind word, it seems to disarm them. And that's a plus. So I would look to having a conversation with that person and really finding out what it's all about. And then if I didn't succeed, I would think of someone who could possibly act as a mediator,
Okay.
a go-between, who can probe the person's mind. This is following the way of peace.
Peace.
And then if I find out that, you know, the Bible talks about as long as it's in your power, follow peace, with all men.
Amen.
So if I feel that I've exhausted what is in my power and within my space to offer, then I would make a tactical withdrawal. So and withdrawing doesn't mean a fight.
Yeah.
It just, I would think that's part of boundaries. I would then say to myself, I've given it my best. Now I've got to also guard my emotions.
Yeah.
If I were to meet that person at a meeting, and this is office because you can't, you may not be able to avoid that person totally. I would be very cordial. I'd be very cordial. I'd be open to believing the best and not believing that I was being attacked in spite of the way the person's behavior comes across.
Okay,
so I'd try to have an open mind. And I would try also not to speak evil about that person. So maintaining a boundary doesn't mean being nasty. It doesn't mean being mean. It actually, you could observe the fruit of the Spirit while keeping a boundary. So it just means that the person is not your best friend, but he or she is not your enemy as well.
Yeah.
And then if I approach it spiritually now, to give you a biblical example, Esther, I would also be praying about it. I'll pray for God's favor. I'll pray for God to give me the wisdom to approach that relationship and to interact with that person. So you remember in the case of Esther, I mean, I'm sure King Ahasuerus was quite fierce. And the kings then were very dictatorial. And you approach them at the risk of your own life. So Esther had a situation at hand, the genocide of the Jews, the impending genocide. What did she do? She got a message from Mordecai, her father, mentor, or her godfather, so to speak. And Esther took a fast. And in the fast, she must have been seeking God's help, clearly. And guidance.
And, direction.
And direction. And methodology. How do we answer what do I do? I'm a slave girl who came into the palace. I don't even want to compromise. I mean, there's no book. We're reading the story of Esther. Esther didn't have a story to read. And God spoke to her. And what did he say? Esther, have a banquet. A banquet would involve candlelights, a nice table set, lovely tablecloths, because she was in the palace. So we have to determine what that banquet
means for
or
you.
Atmosphere means in our circumstance. So go back to Esther palace. Nice, the best of plates. The king is coming for dinner, the best of clothes. And then God said something interesting. Invite the enemy to the banquet. He lays a table before us in the presence of our enemies. And the enemy comes and is confused. So sometimes your Christian fruit of the Spirit can actually confuse the enemy. And it was sorted out. And then I don't think Esther stood like this and looking down at the king. So I reckon that it must have been very nice, relaxing, convivial, enjoyable, such that the king forgot the reason for
and even the enemy was so relaxed.
I tell you, and it was sorted out. And Esther got, by the time Esther was done with the king, he was asking, what do you want to
half of my kingdom? Well, that's good. Okay, now I have this one that says, how can a wife protect her mental health and establish boundaries in a marriage where moral principles and beliefs with her husband continue to diverge? It's quite a lot. So she wants to protect her mental health, establish boundaries in her marriage where moral principles and beliefs with her husband continue to diverge. So they're like walking different paths. The way they think, what they believe, their values. How can she protect those values, protect her mental health? What can she do?
You better be ready to answer that, to that question or to that answer. It seems to me that from her questions that they may have, of course, clearly they have divergent values
Yeah.
and also belief. That could also have a religious component
yeah.
to that. I would think that if there is an issue where that is the case as we've described it, I want to believe that true Christian values, when implemented and lived out, would after some time, it may take time, but after some time convert even the
most cynical.
the most cynical person. And because the Bible does say a believing wife can sanctify an unbelieving husband, or let me put it this way, could by her conduct, which is also biblical, minister to a husband who doesn't have the same beliefs. But I want to put it out there to whoever asks the question, it wouldn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It very rarely does. And in that situation, sometimes God allows it to build up the fruit of the Spirit. You see, if a mad person curses you on the road, you won't give a thought or a consideration because you're not going to the same house. So, I mean, he's crazy, so why give him a thought?
Yeah.
So you move on. But when the situation is in the house, it's like sandpaper, rubbing off you. And therein actually is the crucible that brings out the fruit of the Spirit. So that could be one way to look at it. And where it becomes toxic, for instance, if it involves values that are so distinctly different as to become oppressive, but physically and spiritually and emotionally, then we have to draw a boundary. Now, before you draw a severe boundary, I think you would look for someone to speak to. That person, the counselor, would make sure that you see it from an objective perspective, not a subjective one. Because if you're in it, you've been in it for long, you could be looking at it from a subjective point of view, which is not healthy. Where the counselor comes in is to say, I think it could be better or it could be worse. And then it helps you. After you've spoken to the counselor and you do your assessment again, if it continues to the next level, you may want to bring in godly family meetings. Because in our culture, family is involved when the two come together. And I use the word godly. That could be pastors, pastoral, beyond the initial counselor, or sometimes the pastors are before the counselor, whichever one. But you bring in one or two more people. And at this point, could the people intervene talking to both of you? So it's a process. If it becomes, in spite of the layers, it becomes really toxic. Then we've got to assess and say, what is God saying? And that comes with praying, seeking the face of God, and the Holy Spirit will speak to you. Because, the matters can be very varied beyond what people are putting down here.
It can have layers.
Yes. And then at that point, you take a decision. Is this for my well-being? For the well-being of the children, can I continue? If not, I'll take the next step.
Well, that's a lot.
You want to add to that?
Well, the one thing I wanted to say is when you say where moral principles and beliefs diverge, and sometimes when you talked about our values, when you leave the Christian principles, sometimes it's enough to convert. And I think it's in simple things. Sometimes we say, he's doing deals that I don't like and all that, but you're also eating the profit of those deals. You're not standing up to say, look, I don't want this. Or simple things as you're saying his moral values and beliefs are different, but you have a help at home that you scream on at every point in time. You see, the difference is that you might think, oh, where it's just small, his own is large. You see, but he's not saying it like that. You're preaching one thing, but you're not living it. So sometimes I think even the constant from us emanating that fruit is enough to wear and sandpaper the harshness. And like you said, it takes time. But one day, you know how people say husband and wife begin to look like each other later on in life. Your characters begin to mirror each other later. It's just time, but you can't say a thing and do something else. It's very important. Okay, the last question I'll take. This one says, which is quite important because of the climate we're in now. How can you set boundaries in the home where finances and kids' upkeep become an issue? How can you even shield them from this, the children? So we know the climate we're in. We know that everything is just up in the air right now. It's not the way a lot of us were brought up, where we saw our fathers going to work and bringing the money. Our mothers worked if they wanted to. Now it's like even the men are asking the women, what are you bringing to the table? It's no more, I'm the one taking the bill. So
those were the good old days.
Those days are gone. So there's the issue of the finances. How can she draw a boundaries where there's financial issues, and even shield the children from...
Yes, I get the impression from that question that she's probably the breadwinner, clearly. Okay. I think, as you mentioned, that we live in a different climate. We live in a different season where it's very difficult now to run a home on one income. So when the young ladies come now, or when we sit with couples who intend to get married, I mentioned the issue of finances and work. And because a lot of the counseling nowadays would tend to originate, or the need for the counseling originate from financial constraints in the home. So that's becoming really predominant. And people don't seem to have the grace to love for love's sake anymore. So I would start by, Miriam, when the ideal would be in today's world for both people to work, I don't think we can really subscribe to the way the parents lived, much as it would be nice. But so I recommend that the two people have
some kind of income.
I'm finding out that most times the women tend to get employment faster than the men. And the men resort to business. So where the men are already in employment, I'll come to the substance of the question. Where the men are already in employment, I really recommend they stay there. If you have a business opportunity, work the business opportunity and hold on to the permanent job. Because business in this environment is very precarious now. And even if it were not, it takes time for business to blossom. So stay in the workplace and let the business grow. This would be my wise counsel. To the point where the business earns you income commensurate to your workplace, or even more. And even at that time, you've accumulated a savings so that even if this business were to stumble on hard ground,
there's something to
you have something to fall back on. That would be one. Because where the woman earns more, even with her patience and fruit of the Spirit, she inadvertently or by virtue of what goes on and the way the husband feels uncomfortable, she begins to feel she's walking on eggshells. Because he's either saying,
Oh, because it's
because if you do anything wrong or you even do anything good, there are even instances where when the woman is doing her very best, at some point the man becomes resentful. The man's respect is important to the man, and his ego is important. So the men should also bear that in mind when there are issues to do with finances and do their best to provide. I believe that where there is a way, sometimes the starting point for the man may not be as luxurious as he wants it to
be.
I would like to canvass that the men start somewhere and take it a step at a time. The business would not be a garden of roses overnight. Even a garden of roses has to be tended. So you may start with the job that is not very happy, but you need something for your CV. You need something to make progress. The business may not seem like something you are proud. I mean, you have to be proud of the fact that it's dignified labor, and I'm doing something honest. So and then the women have to be patient, because in the society where we are in, I'm told that in street parlance, it's referred to as blow. You want to make it overnight. So we also have to be accommodating that there are certain things that can't be provided for. But is a gentleman making progress? Yes. Is he making an attempt to provide? Yes. And we encourage him in that pathway. Now, so I would counsel the lady to be wise, to be patient, but to also be encouraging in helping him find options. And where she's got a gift that he doesn't have, sometimes women are very prudent, women are good administrators. The man should be open to embrace those gifts that would enhance his business or his employment or his success as an employee. Now the children. Would you like to add to that, or shall I go?
No, go on with the children.
The children actually are more clever than we give them. They know it.
They know.
I mean, they have access to the internet. But bring it down to reality. The other day, I looked at a packet of Dano. Well, Dano is common in our own context here. Milk, powdered milk. And I remember that there was a time we were buying Dano for 400 naira. And to my shock and astonishment, Dano is now 2,000 naira, as at 3 days ago. It may have changed. And I said to the gentleman who had the packet of Dano, I said, this is crazy. The children may not know the detail of it because they are not keeping the files of the payment slips or the receipts. But when you sit down and explain to a child that this is what it is, I believe that with the conversation they understand. But if you say, no, you're not having the Dano milk anymore. They don't know no, you're not having cornflakes. They don't understand it. But if you have a discussion and discuss like you're discussing with adults. Yes, that means where we were earning 100,000, if we keep buying the Dano, we won't even have a family. We won't even be able to pay your school fees. And this reality is hitting both perceived rich and perceived poor. There is no water. Everything is expensive. So nobody's exempt. Nobody's exempt. Even if you have a huge savings, if you're not careful, your savings, because if you saved 1 million naira, the 1 million naira is worth what I'm telling you, is worth 300, 200,000 now. 200,000 naira. So we all have to make adjustments. And I like to encourage people by saying, tough times won't last forever, but tough people will. So we just... And humans have the, it reminds me also of the Civil War. The other day I said to someone, I said, you know, we're in a war situation, but without the ammunitions and without the
Wow.
bombs and the aircrafts.
Yeah.
You know, so one gratitude is, but I said, the way I remember coming out of the Civil War was rationing of food. And everybody had to share what they had. I even remember cues of, you know, when you see wars and they say, oh, we need to pass on a humanitarian corridor to take food. I mean, it happened here too.
Wow.
So people had to ration what came through those UN relief projects. So it kind of, so we had to make the adjustments. Unfortunately, we're in a famine. I think it's clear to the blind.
Yes.
And we have to make adjustments, but it will pass,
It will pass.
by God's grace.
Amen.
By God's, because it has to be miraculous,
It has
because
to
what
be.
you see doesn't speak
Doesn't
of,
show it,
doesn't show
but
it.
yes.
But we have to believe.
And I like the way you've gone through this question step by step, from the relationship with the husband to the wife and to the children. So this financial boundary is something that it affects. So it's not just her that has to do this boundary by herself. It's a family thing.
Yeah.
The conversation with the husband, them making a decision together, and
Yes.
whatever you do, it's a united front to the
Yes.
children.
Yes.
It's also very important.
That's
so that
important.
it's not like it's mommy making the decision and then
Yes.
daddy feels, okay, because you are the one that has the money, you are the one that's saying what we can eat or not. So I always think that shut the door. That's what I used to believe. Shut the door, and two of you, you're like a government on your own, make a decision.
Absolutely.
Then you come out, open the door, and bring them in and discuss. And like you said, kids understand.
Yeah.
From the youngest to the oldest, they understand. You just have to explain why the decision is necessary, the cons and pros, why if we do this way,
Yeah.
then we can achieve this.
Yeah.
If we don't do this, this is what happens at the end of the day. I think we have to be more honest. I think parents were shielding children too much.
Yes.
I think so. And
yes.
minus even the situation of the country, even if everything was okay, you're shielding them so much that when they go out, they're not ready
Yes.
for what the world is throwing at
Yes.
them, because you've shielded them so much.
Yes.
They think they're going to go there and everybody's going to tell them how wonderful and how amazing they are, even if they don't lift a finger. But the world is ready to tell them that you're not enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think shielding isn't it, building them up.
Yes.
That should be the answer.
Yes.
Well, thank you so
Yes.
much. We've been able to go through most of the questions, and we're so grateful. Now, one of the things we're going to do on Conversation with Mrs. R is that we're going to be giving you counseling lines, and so you'll see them scrolling if you want to talk, because we do talk about the issues, but I know, like we say, some of these questions, they're the surface of something deeper, and people might need someone to talk to, somebody to be able to, or you're even just listening to us, and there's something you wish you could ask, and you
Yeah.
need help. The whole reason why this happens is to help. So we will have those contacts and numbers that you can reach out, and somebody will be there to actually help you go through this. I always say that if you just had a hand to hold,
Yeah.
sometimes, do you know, sometimes it's not like you even want someone to solve your problem. Sometimes it's just someone to listen.
Yes. Yes.
It's so important.
And I think something that we could look forward to would be people emailing
Yeah,
questions they couldn't ask.
yeah.
And we could reply by
Reply.
email too.
Exactly.
Yeah, the office. So that makes
Yeah, so we'll do that. You have the email address. You have all that. We just want to be able to help, able to come to your homes, have a conversation with you, and make it a bit better. Thank you so much, Mrs. R.
Thank you, Miriam.
I learned so much sitting here, and I make notes in my head, and I'm like, okay, this has to go. You see this food one? Hey God, we're plenty on this table. Eh? We have plenty on this table. January 1st, the amount of things. No, in fact, I have done no sugar challenge. This one, that one. So, you've broken it down in a way that this one hit me. You've broken it down, and I think it's achievable when you don't go cold turkey. And you also reward yourself and say, well done. You've been able to achieve this,
Yes.
And I think it's even a lifestyle thing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, and it was wonderful as usually having a conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Thank you to everyone out there who's been a part of Conversations today. We will be back, of course, on this same channel, hoping that you will share with us. And of course, once we have conference dates, it will always be on our page. Subscribe to our page, put your notification on, so every time we come back on, your notification is on and you can be a part of the conversation. Thank you for listening.